Today's webinar will be divided into three main parts. The opening session, we have some remarks to be delivered by the IIF chairman, which is the welcome address, Oladele Ofolabi. The chairperson's remarks, none other than Ms. Yewande Sadiku, who is the executive secretary and CEO of the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, and a gentleman who will be giving the keynote speech. He's Vikas Bali, the CEO of Intellicap, the advisory arm of Avishka Group in India. We will have two moderated panel discussions with very experienced subject matter experts, consultants. We have Development Finance Institution represented here as well in the conversation, and consultants. I'll say that we have two recordings from other people who are experts also in the subject matter to share their insights via video. We'll play some clips of that. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the chairman of the Impact Investors Foundation to give the opening remarks, Engineer Oladele.
Thank you, Maria. I hope I'm being heard. Good morning, distinguished guest speakers and participants at this third edition of IIF Convening. Permit me, for reasons of brevity, to skip the usual protocol and be light on the rehash of the objectives of IIF, which you will find the details on our website. Our gathering today deals with that aspect of our objectives on creating awareness on critical areas that deserve attention on impact investing. That said, 2020 stands out as a year of remarkable disruption to life as we have been familiar with, and most significantly, by the impact of COVID-19. COVID-19 global and multifaceted impact has driven collective thinking on what I call existential policy reset. One of the principal areas has been on gender, masculinity, and COVID-19. In April 2020, University of Minnesota Gender Policy Report wrote, and I quote, "Gender is shaping the COVID-19 crisis in real and significant ways. Beyond the direct, visible practices that by now we all should understand, stay home, wash your hands, step back 6 feet, gender and its interactions with class, race, and immigrant status impact a number of dimensions of this crisis. From epidemiology to the vulnerabilities of frontline health workers, from the distribution of care work within families to the implications of quarantine for domestic violence, we need to reflect critically on these interactions to shape a truly effective policy response to this pandemic. Most recent reporting and analysis about gender and COVID-19 has focused primarily on women as caregivers and frontline health workers. These are crucial issues, but there seems to be getting lost. What seems to be getting lost is that gender affects all of us. That's because gender is not just biology. It is constituted by the social norms, symbols, and power structures that define our cultural expectations from how we should act to access economic opportunities. In the same April 2020, the United Nations policy brief said that the pandemic is deepening pre-existing inequalities, exposing vulnerabilities in social, political, and economic systems, which are in turn amplifying the impacts of the pandemic. Across every sphere, from health to the economy, security to social protection, the impacts of COVID-19 are exacerbated for women and girls simply by virtue of their sex. For these reasons, the following action plan was being espoused by the United Nations. One, to ensure women's equal representation in all COVID-19 response planning and decision-making. Drive transformative change for equality by addressing the care economy, paid and unpaid. And thirdly, target women and girls in all efforts to address the socio-economic impact of COVID-19. These facts informed IIF's choice for this 2020 convening, essentially to increase stakeholders' awareness of gender lens investing in Nigeria, demonstrate why gender lens investing and how it is being deployed in response to COVID-19, encourage commitments to adopt GLI and identify a community of actors that can monitor progress and enable the flow and deployment of capital for gender lens investing as a strategy to reduce the barrier to accessing finance for female-led, managed, and female-focused products and service enterprises in Nigeria. Today, we have accomplished experts to lead us through this task, led by Yewande Sadiku, Executive Secretary and CEO of the Nigerian Investment Promotion Council and chairperson of today's event. I've known Yewande for years, an excellent career throughout Stanbic IBTC as an investment banker. We have two panels that Maria already spoke to, and I will not waste further time other than to now invite Ms. Yewande Sadiku to make her opening remarks, and thereafter she'll be followed by Vikas Bali, CEO, Intel Cap Advisory Limited, who will deliver the keynote address or the keynote speech on COVID-19 and gender lens investing, a global landscape. Welcome once more, and a rewarding day to all participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ladele, and good day to all, morning, afternoon, and evening, depending on what part of the world you're joining us from. I work for a government agency called Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission that was established to encourage, promote, and coordinate investments in Nigeria. We believe our mandate can only be best achieved if we are able to attract investments across Nigeria on a deliberate and we believe our mandate can only be best achieved if we're able to attract investments across Nigeria on a deliberate basis. Deliberate across all the 36 states, deliberate across the sectors in which Nigeria has a competitive advantage, and deliberately to achieve what the Constitution estimated, what the Constitution projected. I was saying in the context of NIPC's work, we find that we can only best achieve our objective if we're deliberate in attracting investments across Nigeria, across all the 36 states, if we're deliberate in attracting investments to the sectors where Nigeria has a competitive advantage, and if we're deliberate in attracting investments in a manner that ensures that the objectives of the Nigerian Constitution are achieved, and that is that wealth is not concentrated in the hands of a few. When most people think about that, they think about that from a federal character perspective. I think it is important to also think about it from a gender perspective. Now, COVID has brought to all a stark realization, first of our obligations to one another. But it has also demonstrated that, when things like this happen, the consequences are disproportionately on those who are the most vulnerable and those who are the most disadvantaged in many countries, and certainly in Nigeria. In these low-income households, in the informal sectors and the like, we find a lot of women. Gender lens investing, I believe, to be the correct way for the world to look at investments. I consider it to be a deliberate attempt to rebalance what is undoubtedly an accident of history. We're about 50-50 male-female in Nigeria, but if you look at wealth distribution, it is disproportionately against women. So I look forward to the conversations today that will help to increase awareness of a variety of stakeholders on gender lens investing, particularly in Nigeria, and how we can use this different perspective. It's not a different asset class, it's not a different sector, it is only a different perspective. I use this different but important perspective in ensuring that as we build back the Nigerian economy post-COVID, that we build it back better. I'm excited about the variety of speakers that we have today and the conversations that I expect will come from them. And I look forward to an iterative engagement that will actively engage those who have joined us. I see there's 68 participants, and I expect the number to grow as the event progresses. But thank you very much for the privilege of chairing today's session, and I look forward to listening to the conversations across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Yewande. May I invite Vikas now, please?
Thank you very much, Folabi. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Chairperson Yewande, Folabi, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to represent the Avishkar Group and Intellicap. I'm indeed delighted to be speaking on a topic of such importance. Before I commence my formal speech, I thought I would take the liberty of indulging in some propaganda about who we are, so that you find ourselves as credible students to be talking on this very, very important topic. The Avishkar Group and Intellicap were set up about 2 decades ago with the objective of bridging the opportunity gap for the other 3 billion by providing them with products and services that all of us in this virtual panel are used to receiving. With that in mind, we set up 4 businesses as we speak today. The first is Avishkar Capital. It's a fund which invests in very, very early stage enterprises. And cumulatively till date, we have invested about $450 million in 70 plus enterprises across as far as Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and India. And hopefully we'll be launching a fund soon for East Africa as well. We run a microfinance entity called Arohan, which has about $650 million in assets under management and has 2.3 million beneficiaries, 98-99% of whom are women borrowers, typically taking loans in the range of $150 to $400, $500. Third, we also have another NBFC, which is focused on lending to small, medium enterprises without any collateral. Some of our clients again are women. Last but not the least, Intellicap is a firm that I represent. Our mission is to build enabling ecosystems, channelize capital to build a more sustainable, equitable society. With this in mind, we believe that capital, knowledge, and networks are very, very key to bringing the transformation that all of us so desire, including the SDGs or Global Goals 2030. And we've been working physically in India and in East Africa and virtually across the globe with our consulting business, our investment banking business, and Sankalp, which is our platform for bringing everybody together in the developmental agenda. We are going to have our Sankalp Africa Summit in the beginning of March, 2nd to 4th. So hopefully we'll be able to see some of you participate in that as well. We've been working very aggressively in the space of space of gender, including doing landscape researches in different countries, including Kenya, Indonesia, India, Rwanda. We've been working on digitizing women-centric value chains across the globe. We have been studying the flow of capital or the lack thereof to very small women enterprises, to women collectives, and to women entrepreneurs in general. Lastly, but not the least, we've been also helping companies integrate gender into their business and also raise capital for women entrepreneurs. So having said this as context, I wanted to share my thoughts on this very crucial topic today. At the outset, let me play astrologer. And over the next 10 to 15 years, or in 10 to 15 years' time, I do expect that there'll be a similar conclave, which would be talking about the declining participation on men in the workforce and how to arrest that decline. Why do I make this prediction? The pandemic has presented us with many challenges, and within it are a few opportunities as well. A couple of key challenges that our women folk have faced across the globe are time and travel. And the pandemic has changed the definition of time and travel in, I believe, very, very significant ways. Today, we are meeting here virtually, where we would have actually met in person, traveled from different locations, stayed in hotels, taken airlines, and reached the place and met with each other. However, now we are doing this virtually, and thousands of people can connect across the globe without the limitations of time differences or the need for travel. And hence, we as a group believe that the future of work is going to get very, very dramatically disrupted with the change in time and travel. And this, I believe, is a very, very significant opportunity which will reduce the challenges of women's economic participation. I also believe that this would be driven by a lot of other factors. For instance, our experience as debt providers suggests that women borrowers are very creditworthy, as the NPAs and consequent credit costs are significantly lower. In the case of SMEs, there was a study by IFC which said that the NPAs of women borrowers are 3.6%, while those of men borrowers are 4.5%. As equity investors, we find no reason at all why a male entrepreneur will succeed while a woman will not. There is absolutely no reason why sex is a distinguishing factor for success of an enterprise. Third, as ecosystem builders, we believe that women economic participation will lead to, number one, better savings, number two, better allocation of income to families, where women will typically end up spending 90% of their incomes towards the families, whereas in the case of males, it's only about 30 to 40%, with a focus on health, nutrition, and education. On the ESG criteria, there have been many reports, including IFC, who have suggested that participation of women in executive committees, in boards, leads to better ESG, better risk management, better decision making, and improve board dynamics. And last but not the least, closer home in Africa, there's a McKinsey study which says that about $300 billion of GDP would increase by 2025 if each country makes advances in women equality. So there are a whole host of reasons why the participation of women and genderless investing makes very, very obvious sense. With all these good things, you may ask, why is the world waking up to this reality right now? What took so long? And as this slide suggests, there are lots of data points which say that there is an increasing flow towards genderless investing. Number of funds are up, the amount of capital deployed is up. But what took so long? And the answer very clearly is that each one of us needs to ponder on the social mindsets that we have been dealing with, which are so deep-rooted, that this journey of genderless investing has just about begun. We are at just the tip of the beginning of the journey towards genderless investing. We recently did a study in Southeast Asia, where we looked at data over the last 15 odd years. And we find in the last 4 years, about $350 million has gone into genderless investing, versus $43 odd million in the period from 2006 to 2016. So you can again see that the numbers are increasing. But guess what? Only 6% of the deals are GLI in terms of value. And in terms of number, 1 in 8 deal is GLI. So there is a reason that we need to address and try and scale up this opportunity and address the gap, which continues to be very, very large. There's another study which says that the overall MSME market, of which women control about 1 in 4 enterprises, in the emerging markets, the gap is about $1.7 trillion. This means a lot of opportunity in terms of employment generation is lost, productivity enhancement, and overall economic progress is lost. So how do we climb this mountain? Could you move to the next slide? The overall conversation has so far been focused very, very aggressively on access to finance. This is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. The centuries of patriarchal attitudes need to undergo behavioral change, which would require us to focus not only on the women, but on their immediate family male members, and in some cases, even the extended society as well, which can continue to place roadblocks. We believe that the ecosystem approach is extremely critical to addressing the developmental challenges, and this applies to mainstreaming GLI as well. While it's important to make women entrepreneurs investment ready and work with investors to make them more amenable to investing with gender lens, it's equally important to develop systems and processes for sourcing of businesses, building capacities of intermediaries, providing supportive research and advocacy to create receptivity in the investing in business communities. One of our key learnings has been that in order to promote GLI, institutions need to take a prime mover role. We have seen the case of Southeast Asia, where investing in women has played this very, very important role. I am sure we'll hear on the panel a little while later from Jen the role that 2X Challenge has been playing and the role of DFIs, including CDC, in taking this forward. However, even prime movers need support, and they need the support of fund managers, incubators, consulting outfits, not-for-profits that can help crystallize GLI deals. For instance, as fund managers, when we are raising capital, is there a possibility that we are aware of the LP intent and advocacy towards channelizing capital towards the gender lens? And there are many, many such examples that will come to mind. In Indonesia, for instance, Ancient Women's Fund has been established by 15 Indonesian high net worth individual women to invest in businesses led or owned by female enterprises. So all in all, what I'm trying to really communicate is that there is a very, very important need to adopt an ecosystem-led approach towards gender lens investing. Beyond this, what else? Could you move to the next slide, please? We need to think about expanding the definition of GLI. Our focus has been very, very specifically on women-owned businesses, who are an integral component, no doubt. But investing in businesses that have a positive gender impact means including investing in businesses that have a positive impact on gender by providing access to livelihood for women, either directly or indirectly, as retailers, wholesalers in their extended value chains, or by providing goods and services that improve the lives of women and girls. Evidence suggests that economic participation of women means higher growth rates, means better health, nutrition indicators. So it impacts not only just SDG 5, but SDGs 1, 2, 3, and 4 as well. So as ecosystem builders, we need to make sure that we are placing enough emphasis on businesses which are going to create a positive gender impact. Last but not the least, a further transformation will be achieved when we can ensure that all businesses, including everybody on the table here today, listening to this conversation, all our businesses need to incorporate gender in our business models. We need to think of women as consumers when we are designing our products. For instance, in the agricultural field in India, almost 40 to 50% of the farm labor is women. And when they are cultivating paddy, they have to use sickle, which is extremely high in weight. Now, why do they have to be put with such torture? Because the product designers have not really felt that this is going to be used by women. So all of us need to really think about women as consumers, as users of the products in our market entry strategies, and make a very, very ambitious commitment to making sure that all businesses have a positive gender impact. Go to the next slide, please. Planting the flag at the top of this mountain that we need to climb, we believe we need to bring together intent, ideas, and investments. We need to move from gender sensitive to gender explicit as far as our intent is concerned. I repeat again, we need to move from gender sensitive to gender explicit. Our intent does not need to be catalyzed only by donors or by the leadership, but it needs to be driven by the entire organization, as I was just mentioning. Our objectives about gender participation should not only be about just compliance related issues, but it should be to promote overall gender equality. And our approach does not need to be programmatic, but it needs to be one of integration. On the ideas front, all the ecosystem stakeholders need to be creating new ideas around products, processes, and people. On the example of a product, because of the patriarchal mindset, most women entrepreneurs do not have access to collateral. They do not have land in their name. They do not have any movable or immovable assets in their name. So institutions who are looking for collateral need to step back and recreate what kind of products they should develop in order to be able to flow capital towards women entrepreneurs. From a processes standpoint, we need to think again about our partnerships and who are we dealing with, and are we following gender aware processes or gender intentional capital sources, and making sure that our gender enabling businesses are becoming more and more visible. As far as people are concerned, it's a very typical experience that women entrepreneurs face when they are dealing with capital providers, where they'll be asked about challenges, whereas male entrepreneurs will be asked about opportunities at the time of due diligence. Sales teams of financial institutions are driven by males. And we know that women will tend to borrow more from women intermediaries. So how do we bring in a more gender sensitive dimension and provide sensitization training to all our employees and staff to overcome these unconscious biases? Last but not the least, investments. When we speak about GLI, our bias is towards equity, but debt is a very, very important vehicle for creating large-scale impact. And for debt to be channeled through into institutions, it's extremely important that the role of government and the public sector institutions becomes a very, very important role that they have to play in creating easier access to debt capital at more reasonable rates and through these public institutions, which will enable the opportunity set for our women entrepreneurs and women-owned, women-focused businesses to be able to really scale up to the next level. So having said that, I have a love for the mic, but in the interest of time, I'll now stop my presentation, but certainly do go to the last slide. I want to end with this very, very important saying: no force on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. In the context of the pandemic and the future of work, which is now, we believe, going to completely change over the next 10, 15 years, hopefully we will see a much better balance on the overall women economic participation to 50-50 levels as is their right. Thank you very much again for the opportunity to speak on this very, very important occasion.
Thank you very much, Vikas, for that very important speech that will set the tone for today's panel discussion. So going on next will be the first panel discussion, and the topic is attracting capital for gender lens investing in Nigeria, opportunities and challenges. I'd like to call on Nneka Eze, the partner, Dalberg Advisors in Nigeria. I'd like to read a quick introduction. Nneka is the partner, where she serves as Nigerian director and co-leads Dalberg's global agriculture and food security practice. She has focused on a range of sectors, including agriculture, creative industry, financial services, urban resilience, education, youth employment and inclusive growth. At this point, I'd like to welcome Nneka to lead the panel conversation. Thank you, Nneka.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think what we'll do is if we can remove the slides, we can have our panelists showing. And I'll ask the panelists to turn on their videos if at all possible, so that when you're speaking, the audience can see you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this discussion. I think over the past sort of 30 minutes, you've heard a bit of the context in terms of the size of the challenge and I guess a bit of why gender lens investing is so important, what that opportunity can look like in Nigeria. And I think as well as Mrs. Sadiku highlighted this question about the importance of deliberation and being deliberate about gender lens investing. I think from my own personal histories, I think as someone who has been raised on Black feminist ideologies and somebody whose name means mother is supreme, these topics are very near and dear to my heart. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that we'll be having today. I think the first panel discussion is really this question about how do we attract gender lens investing in Nigeria? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? We'll be hearing from a range of panelists, including Vikas from IntelliCap, who will share some more from some of the report that they actually helped to develop on the global landscape for gender lens investing, and a number of panelists, including representatives from development finance institutions, a women-focused and gender lens fund, as well as a number of additional funds which have a gender lens funds with them. So I think this should be a great discussion. I'll start by going round to the panelists, and I'd like to have them introduce themselves, and what they can do is introduce themselves, their organization, and share a little bit about what is actually included when you consider gender lens investing. So why don't we start with Temilade from Alethea Capital, and then we'll go around.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear and see me clearly. So I am with Alethea IDF. Alethea IDF is a private equity fund that provides catalytic capital to high growth SMEs by proactively investing in a diversified portfolio of women-owned or women-led or women-serving companies to generate superior financial and social returns. Now, in understanding the nature of the fundamental problems of gender disparity and discrimination, we at Alethea appreciate that there are structural as well as systemic issues that keep women away from growth capital and growth opportunities. And as Vikas mentioned in his presentation, it's more than just access to capital. There are also, systemic mindsets on biases, etc., that shape the way that women are treated in society and that keep them excluded. So what we have found is that in shaping our idea of impact, we define impact as the creation of accessibility, affordability, and inclusion of underserved markets and people. And so at Alethea, we created a fund to enable access to capital for women as an underserved demographic, targeting the missing middle as having the most potential for scale and growth and impact. Our fund provides capital and value add to gender diverse teams and businesses where women are either the majority owners or leaders, or where they play a significant part in the value or supply chain, or where they are the primary consumers or beneficiaries of an essential good or service. So it sounds like I'm reading from Vikas's speech, but this really is our investment thesis. Speaking to the learnings that you have come about in your part of the world as well. I guess these challenges really are systemic. And so in articulating our fund, we developed a lens that is deliberately broad, because what we seek to do is find women where they are and then reach out to create outcomes, both economic, financial, and social outcomes that can reach women where they are and improve outcomes for women. So in that sense, we articulate our gender lens through a toolkit that that we developed ourselves. It's a pioneering toolkit. And what it does is it demonstrates gender smartness within leadership, within the portfolio, and it seeks to develop stronger gender performance within the wider ecosystem.
We'll move on to Jen Braswell from CDC. You can introduce yourself and really share a bit about what's included when you think about gender and lens investing as CDC.
Great. Thank you so much, Nika. And hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. Many thanks to Maria and the whole Impact Investors Foundation team in Nigeria for the invitation. I'm Jen Braswell. I lead the value creation teams within the Impact Group at CDC Group, which is the UK's development finance institution. We are a relatively large investor, certainly a large investor in Africa. We invest only in the private sector, and we have a significant portfolio of investments, specifically in Nigeria. So CDC has been on an accelerated journey with gender finance over the past several years. And we really only started looking at the field seriously in 2017, when there was a lot of kind of excitement and movement in the market with big players and big financial institutions launching gender strategy products. And our shareholder, our leadership team, and our deal teams started to take note. And so we went through the effort of assessing our portfolio and trying to understand where women were participating in our investments. Not surprisingly, we found that we, first of all, didn't really know because we weren't gathering the data very clearly. And also that when we did see participation, those levels were quite low. We were very surprised. And so we went about the process of trying to understand how we as investors can move our capital with a much more intentional gender lens. So we launched our gender strategy in 2018. And as echoed by the others, we look at some very core areas in the corporate value chain. So we look at women's ownership. We look at women in leadership, which is boards and senior management. We look at women in the workforce, and we look at women as consumers of the products and services of our portfolio companies. And we have done all of this in kind of a short period of time, which then required the process of developing much more clear definitions. So we set that framework first, and then we had to set more clear definitions. And we did that in collaboration with a number of other investors. And I'm looking forward to talking about that further as we get to that part of the conversation. But let me stop there and look forward to hearing from the other panelists.
Great, thank you very much, Jen. We'll go to Vikas. I think you've already introduced yourself. So perhaps you can just share a little bit, how do you as an organization think about gender lens investing as you're sort of applying it across, as you were saying, the portfolio that you have?
Thank you, Nika, for that question. As I mentioned, we have 4 different companies who are in 4 diverse businesses. Our investment arm is looking to make investments in very early stage enterprises. And we have invested equity into some companies who are run by women entrepreneurs. And as I said, we found no reason why women entrepreneurs cannot be as successful as their male counterparts. We do believe that it's extremely important for all entrepreneurs to tag team. So have a co-founder, co-promoter along with themselves, because one person trying to solve all the challenges of businesses and of also breaking certain barriers it becomes onerous at points in time. So from an equity investment standpoint, we work very, very closely with women entrepreneurs in helping them scale up. We run a microfinance institution, which is all borrowings to women in the form of a construct, which is a social collateral, which is a JLG construct. We have deployed $650 million, as I said, and we find that the non-performing loans are less in decimal points. And we've been very, very satisfied in the clientele that we have developed, and we are we firmly believe in the cause of supporting women in financial inclusion, and then taking it into providing them with larger ticket size loans through our other NBFC as they graduate from microfinance and try and scale up their businesses. As far as IntelliCap is concerned, our core constituency that we're serving are impact entrepreneurs, are micro, small, medium enterprises, and within this, we focus very, very strongly on women businesses, be it very small women entrepreneurs, be it women collectives, be it individual women entrepreneurs, or they be retailers, wholesalers in the value chains of other large businesses, and work towards flowing more capital to them, providing them with digital tools, adopting digitization, and such other means so that they can really scale up their business. Our focus, to summarize, Neke, is scaling up a business and scaling up economic development through the participation of the underserved communities, in which women, we believe, is a very, very core constituency, and will address the problems of economic growth that the world is facing with the pandemic if we just focus our attention and energy to debottlenecking the challenges that women face.
Great, thank you very much. And finally, we have Tanemba. If you can share, introduce yourself, and then as well share how you're defining gender lens investing across, MBC and She Equity as well.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Tanemba. I'm Executive Director of MBC Africa, which is an advisory firm focusing on agribusiness mainly. Our approach was very, because we work in agriculture, we are aware that women constitute like 50% of the labor, but they only own around 5% of the land, which is the main asset. So going from there, we build different programs and we make sure that women access to those resources to produce. And from there, what we did is that we created different value chains for women entrepreneurs. So it's the business development, but also the financing. And this is where She Equity comes in, which is part of the value chain of financing tools that we put to place for women entrepreneurs. Can discuss further.
Great, thank you. And can you just share a bit, She Equity, how do you define gender lens investing?
Okay, because we invest only in women entrepreneurs. That's for one thing. But we look at ownership as most of the investors. We look at impact also on women as consumers. We look at governance and especially at board level and top management level. These are some of the criteria we have when we choose to invest in a company at She Equity.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And finally, we do have a short video submission. And given, of course, time differences and time zones, unfortunately, she couldn't join, but Anne-Marie Levesque, who's the head of Gender and Impact at FinDev Canada, who is also one of the sort of original members of 2X Challenge, has submitted a video. We'll just play about 2 minutes now, so you get a taste, and then we'll put it on YouTube, and that will be available for you to watch on the IIF channel. So if Maria, can you please play the first 2 minutes?
Hello, everyone, and greetings from Montreal. My name is Anne-Marie Levesque, and I'm the head of Gender and Impact at FinDev Canada, Canada's development and finance institution. It's a pleasure to be addressing the Impact Investors Foundation 3rd Annual Convening on Impact Investing. Sadly, due to the time difference, I will not be able to join you and my fellow panelists live today. But the organizers have been kind enough to give me the opportunity to pre-record my remarks. So here it goes. To the first question, what is included in gender lens investing? I would say that gender lens investing refers to any investment strategy that seeks to generate both financial returns and positive impacts on gender equality. In a private sector context, this includes access to finance for women entrepreneurs, of course, and this is often the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about gender lens investing. But it doesn't stop at that. It also includes making sure that we have women in leadership and decision-making roles. and the importance of giving women access to quality jobs and gender-smart products and services that enhance their well-being, safety and security, and economic independence. An important part of gender lens investing is also to intentionally look for and address potential negative impacts that might affect women disproportionately. This is the approach that is put forward by the 2X Challenge and that we also use at FinDev Canada. Now, how does this interact with FinDev Canada's gender strategy? FinDev Canada is one of the youngest bilateral development finance institutions, created in 2018. Our mission is to provide financial solutions to the private sector in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Our priorities are to create jobs, fight climate change, and empower women. And while all three goals are important to our mission, women's economic empowerment is a core driver of our decision-making, which is why we're proud to say that we look at all our transactions from a gender lens. Our gender lens investing approach is twofold. First, we want to steer capital towards investment opportunities that actively and intentionally empower women. This is why we are proud to be an investor in Alethea IDF, a pioneer fund manager for gender-smart investing in Africa, which is also on the panel today. The second part of our gender lens investing approach consists in encouraging private sector companies to become more gender inclusive. If we want to create real change in the private sector, we have to encourage gender-smart practices in companies and sectors where it's currently absent. Plus, it also makes sense from a business perspective. There is mounting evidence that gender-diverse boards and leadership teams are correlated with better business performance, including higher return on equity and sales, and better ESG performance.
Great, thank you so much, Maria, for playing that video. You'll hear through the video additional tools in terms of gender lens investing, some approaches that FinDev Canada has taken in terms of building the ecosystem, as well as the learnings from their first years of implementing the gender lens strategy internally. I think, Anne-Marie already started to introduce as well Alethea Capital, and Temilade will be speaking a bit more on the work that they're doing. But I think one of the things we want to understand is this question of what are the challenges in terms of gender lens investing? What are the opportunities? I think you hinted at, but with a very positive spin, the fact that you needed to develop your own toolkit in terms of measuring gender lens investing. Would love to hear from you other perspectives in terms of what's been a challenge in terms of really making that capital available for Nigeria, whether that was the fundraising process or it's, as you were saying, developing the tools. What have been those challenges in terms of attracting capital to Nigeria?
Well, and thank you, Nneka. Our gender lens fundraising journey was very long. People who are familiar with the history of the fund can attest. And it was, what was surprising to me, being new at the company at the time, was that we were meeting with investors who wanted to invest in a gender lens fund. They were aligned in the mission of improving outcomes for women, but even at the investor level, at the LP level, you still came in contact with some of those biases and some of those mindsets. So for instance, an investor, like during a due diligence trip, could speak to a prospective pipeline company of ours and ask the woman entrepreneur what part her husband plays in the business, or if she has another job, or kind of like alluding that maybe this is a lifestyle business. And that was interesting for me to observe, because you are speaking to people who are already aligned in the greater goal of providing capital, improving outcomes for women. But here are these mindsets that we almost don't think about, and I think that is why the principal job of gender lens investing is to be intentional in confronting these mindsets and querying them, because they just slide. Like, would you ask a male entrepreneur what part his wife plays, it would never come to mind. You know, once you flip the script, you realize almost how absurd it is. So in that sense, it was, we went through the whole journey of the fund being seen as a charity. People kept, you know, asking if we were actually aiming for commercial returns. And by the way, that is, you know, a principal part of our fund. We do not sacrifice commercial returns for impact because we believe that it is the most sustainable route. And that's just our mandate. And you know, you would also come across people who would say, okay, so are you going to do a male investing fund? All sorts. It made the journey very interesting, but also very challenging, especially when, you know, you cannot respond to some of these questions without showing just how almost ridiculous they are. And so it took a while, and it was also very challenging to unearth businesses that are to the size that, you know, we support in our pipeline. A lot of those deals had to be created because women entrepreneurs themselves sometimes are a bit more cautious or a bit more hesitant. So they needed to be warmed up to the deal or to the perspective of external investors coming in. So some of those relationships took a long time to build. And so it was time taking, it was mind changing, it was a lot of soft work that we saw coming through, but eventually it led to, for instance, the Bank of Industry making the first investment in a private equity fund. The Bank of Industry is a Nigerian DFI, and we were the very first non-debt investment that they made. You know, the AFDB is part of our investors as well. We're proud, you know, for instance, to be part of FinDev's first investments. So we did, you know, get some believers along the way, but for every yes, there were more than 20 no's. So it was a tough journey, but it can be done. And what we are seeing through our, you know, the pipeline that we have now is that the opportunity is actually huge, and we need more women focused investors to capture this, and, you know, to make sure that, because to me the goal is not just for Alethea IDF. It is important that we succeed, but it is important that every fund that is dedicated to women succeeds, so that we can all demonstrate the value that has been slept on, so to speak, all this while.
Great, thank you very much, Temilade. I think, you know, your perspectives in terms of some of the anecdotes around the mindsets and the, you know, training almost that you were having to do all the way through to this question about really how to be intentional as you're thinking about gender lens investing, I think is really, really helpful. We'll move to Jen from CDC. If you can share from the more institutional side, what are some of the challenges that you came across, whether that was internal to CDC or as you sort of go out into the world investing in terms of gender lens investing? And I guess what can we learn in terms of how to drive further gender lens investing in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you. So there have been a number of challenges. I mean, this agenda is not a simple agenda, as any change agenda is not a simple agenda. And frankly, applying a gender lens within a kind of standard business as usual institutional investor framework is change. It does mean doing things differently. I think the first challenge we faced was one that Temilade mentioned, and I know Alethea has experienced, which is that challenge of bias, both unconscious bias and maybe explicit bias that's built into the financial system. And I think, so we spent a good deal of time in the early phases of our discussions in pulling out the why, right? And pulling out all of the reasons, all of the business case factors, all of the, you know, the kind of the drivers for why this is important for an investor. And frankly, the evidence is very clear that gender balance, particularly in leadership teams, drives performance. It drives both commercial performance and impact performance across any number of impact factors you might want to look at. So I'm happy to say we are moving from that period of sort of proving the case and putting forward the why to how. And it is not insignificant, the challenge that an investor faces, particularly a large investor, in operationalizing a gender lens approach. And I'm just going to mention I think what has been the key for us as a development finance institution and frankly for the industry in moving this agenda forward as fast as we have in just a period of a few short years, which is collaboration. In 2017, CDC, along with about 15 other development finance institutions, came together and created the Gender Finance Collaborative, which was essentially a peer learning network that allowed us to come together to kind of share knowledge, to share experience, to share some of that data and research that was helping to prove the why. And we've moved very quickly then into helping each other build tools and, like I mentioned, starting with definitions, the criteria, the indicators, starting to build out the framework that would allow us to begin to operationalize internal to each of our institutions. One of the key initiatives that came out of that early collaboration period was the 2X Challenge, which was a bold statement of commitment to invest across initially 7 DFIs of the G7 countries in businesses that meaningfully support women to the tune of $3 billion by the end of 2020. I'm very happy to say that over the period of time of our collaboration within 2X, we have gained more investors into the network. So we're about 15 investors plus the European Investment Bank as of the close of 2020. And so far, we've invested $4.5 billion into businesses that meaningfully support women along the lines that we've discussed. So women entrepreneurs, businesses that support women in workforce, and businesses that provide goods and services for women. So the 2X Challenge is a very, I think, key, it's been key for us in terms of bringing us together and forcing a focus on developing the tools and the systems that are needed. And I will just quickly mention that some of those critical pieces, some lessons learned, is a bit of the kind of looking back at the journey. So what we did is we started with counting, and the 2X Challenge criteria gave us the framework to begin to do that counting, to understand sort of what the thresholds look like for what is a good portfolio company or fund in terms of gender participation. And then we shifted to valuing, which moved us from just kind of looking at the numbers to really seeing gender diversity as a core strategic asset and a factor of consideration in our decision making. And this is where some of the hard part starts to play out. You need to start to kind of upskill your deal teams to be able to have meaningful conversations on this topic, which some may feel uncomfortable with. You need to build in the data gathering piece in due diligence, and you need to make sure that your investment committees are prepared to have the conversations and to really focus on the participation of women in the business as a positive factor, or the lack of participation as a factor that should be considered in terms of whether this is a meaningful investment that your institution needs to be getting into. And then the last phase, and the one we're just entering into now, is focusing on intentional investing. And this is the origination piece. So this is where we are creating these innovative platforms to be able to reach both women fund managers and capital providers, women-led funds with investment strategies that are focused on women, as well as portfolio companies that are gender smart and meet the definitions that we had laid out with the criteria. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you for sharing that journey, both internally as well as the conversations that you're having and partnerships that you're building with others to move the sector forward. We'll come next to Tanemba, who's raising a fund. I would love to just hear reflections, perhaps in the context of Temilade's reflections as well, but what are some of those challenges that you're facing or opportunities that you're seeing? And I guess any lessons that you've already learned or ideas as perhaps fund managers in Nigeria or across West Africa go on that same journey.
Okay, thank you, Neka. let me just start by saying that we are the stage just before Alitea Fund, meaning that we target early stage women businesses, which makes it even more difficult to have these conversations with LPs, especially with the likes of CDC and FMO, and I call them the usual suspects, because of where we are in the stage of the business life. We need more hybrid type of financing, because when I say she equity, we call it an investment ecosystem. It's not just the fund. So it includes an operational support system plus the venture capital fund. So this is what she equity is about. So for the operational support, it is difficult to fund that with private funding, with commercial funding, because basically what we do is we do venture building, we do acceleration, we do a lot of capacity building, hand-holding on a long period, which normal funds can't do. So we need probably more grants funding or soft funding for that portion of our work. So this has been the biggest challenge, because not all investors offer that hybrid type of investment. So this has been challenge number one. Challenge number two that always comes back when you're in our environment. We're not like Alitea. We've never started a fund before. So we're first-time fund managers. So that's hurdle number two. We're all women, the two of us. There are two women. And also our fund manager, our fund administrator is also a woman. So, and the biases are still there. I know that because I've been on the other side as LP. So all the battles I had on the other side as investor, I see it now as entrepreneur. So, and I think Alitea did a lot of these battles for us. I must say that. I must thank them, because they went through so much. We won't go through that because they've already opened the way and brightly. So again, thank you for that. But where we sit, finding hybrid investment, having people understand that if you really want to build that pool of entrepreneurs or businesses that Alitea can invest to in the next stage, you have to invest in ecosystems like She Equity.
Great. Thank you so much, Temba, for sharing that experience. I think as you're building the fund, but also putting in context the stages of capital that are needed across gender lens investing from early stage to later stage capital, I think that's a great point, and agreed on the path that Alethea Capital has really paved in Nigeria and across the continent with these conversations. Because we'll come to you to share reflections. I think in terms of your portfolio, as you were saying, you've built a quite large business focused in Asia as well as in Africa, particularly in East Africa. What are you seeing in terms of the opportunities to promote gender lens investing? So if you bring all of that experience now to Nigeria, what can we be doing to really support gender lens investing and to continue to pave that way for whether that's women-led fund managers or gender lens investing in the country?
Sure, thanks for that, Nika. I think our experience set suggests that you need a prime mover, as I said in my presentation, some people to really anchor the cause, espouse the cause. Number two, we need to adopt a very, very ecosystem-led approach. Some of the points that were made by the previous panelists are absolutely bang on. Specifically in the case of women-owned businesses, we are expecting women to cross many hurdles, those that the male businesses face, and societal hurdles as well. So we need to definitely set up a pool of funds which will work with them and enable them to be able to access either business service providers or be able to connect them to the markets. So market linkages are a very, very important part where women entrepreneurs, in our experience, need a lot of help. Become participants in the larger value chains of the private sector is something that goes a long way in helping early stage women entrepreneurs scale their businesses up. Most certainly, there is a very, very important need for sensitizing LPs who are putting in their money and understanding their gender intentionality, because obviously, as was rightly mentioned, a pool of funds is required, which will help the women entrepreneurs with the kind of mentoring, training that some of the other entrepreneurs might not need. So understanding the gender intentionality of the LPs becomes another very, very important aspect of scaling this whole initiative up. Specifically, I'd also like to highlight that there's no one size fits all kind of approach. There is no one omnibus program that one can create. It'll have to be value chain by value chain. So it's very, very important to understand what is required in the textiles value chain versus the food and beverage value chain, and address those issues specifically in each of the value chains as we think about making the investments into these businesses. Last but not the least, startup versus scale up, two very, very different sets of challenges requiring very different kinds of institutional support. Startup enterprises need a very, very strong angel network, the venture capital network, who would bring them capital to really test out their products and services. On the established business who are looking to scale up, the micro, small, medium enterprises wanting to move up each ladder, the requirement for capital, the structures for capital are very, very different. So mezzanine fund structures become extremely important. It becomes important to access capital for the women entrepreneurs. We've experienced that there are a lot of government schemes in some parts of the global South, which have been able to really flow in capital to women entrepreneurs in a sizable manner. So startup versus scale up is a dimension that I would urge all of us to think about as we look to expand our portfolio of women businesses. So I'll take a pause here.
Thank you very much for those reflections. I think across the panel, I've been learning quite a bit about how to really apply a gender lens in a lot of different ways. You know, in terms of like my role as an investor, in terms of the investment committee that I sit on, how are we looking at transactions that are more gender lens, and are we applying similar frames of analysis or not? And even with some of the work Dalbrook has done to support WIC Capital, how can we really support them to build the broader ecosystem as well as they're thinking about investing? So thank you for all of the reflections across the panel. We only have a few questions in the Q&A box. So for the attendees, please feel free to add further questions in the Q&A box. You should find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. One, and I think I'll direct this to Temilade, and please, for the other panelists, if this applies to you, please feel free. One question which came up was, are there specific examples of women entrepreneurs they've supported in Nigeria? And then to Tanemba and the rest of Africa as well, feel free to share. And I'll come to Jen and to Vikas if there are examples from Nigeria or from across Africa. So who are some of the women entrepreneurs that you're already investing in? Yeah, we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you. I'll start off. Examples of women entrepreneurs that we have invested in. I think our very first is a microfinance bank that's owned by a woman in Ghana. It's called Innovative Microfinance. I should mention that Alithea invests across Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Zambia, Lesotho, and Zimbabwe. Now, our very first investment was with this entrepreneur in Innovative Microfinance. More recently, earlier this year, actually, we closed one of my favorites. I mean, all our investments are my favorites, but it's a company called Tomato Joss. It's a tomato processing company that's run by a woman called Mira Mehta. They grow tomatoes, and we financed or we're part of a cohort of a syndicate of investors that financed the processing capacity for this business to be able to process and make tomato paste. We have just closed an investment in another company. I'm not going to mention its name because it hasn't yet been announced. They make educational supplies and other supplies to international organizations. Our pipeline is full of businesses that are owned by women, or businesses that have women as significant participants in the value chain, or businesses that provide essential goods or services to women. So coming up, and very soon you will be hearing these announcements. I'm also very excited about our investment in South Africa, which is to a contract manufacturing company that makes mostly hair and skincare products. It is a women-owned business, and surprisingly also most of its customers are women as well. I mean, the end consumers, not the clients. The clients are, you know, Unilever, etc. We have another investment coming up in a fruit processing. I could go on and on, but we do have quite a few existing as well as prospective women-owned businesses and businesses that fit our gender lens in other ways, to answer the question.
Great, thank you, Temilade. Really helpful. Yes, please, Sanemba.
Yes, so She Equity is a baby. We started officially in June 2020, and we started with angel funding. That is very important because we didn't want to wait for people to agree with us. We wanted to show them. So we started with angel funding, and we've closed 3 deals up from June to today because we have a huge pipeline. And the first deal we closed was in, I think in Zambia. It's a renewable energy company owned and led by women. The second one was a big data company, which is operating in both Kenya and Ghana. But it is, I think, headquartered in Ghana, so it's considered as a Ghanaian company. And the third is an agribusiness company. It's in Kenya. So in the beginning of She Equity, we had a Pan-African view, but it turned out that we have our biggest pipeline right now in West Africa, which includes a couple of deals we're looking at in Nigeria and Ghana. So we're working on closing our 4th deal, hopefully by end of the year, but I'm not sure. But this has been an eye-opening, and it has just validated some of the assumptions that we had when we started this journey, and we've learned to improve our process. Hopefully we will scale next year.
Great, thank you for the hints, and we'll look out for the announcements of what's coming this year and early next year. Thank you very much. We have a few questions. Well, first of all, Jen is graciously sort of sharing a number of toolkits, including the Alethea IDF toolkit that Temilade referenced earlier, a CDC and IFC investment guide in terms of gender smart investing, and a gender lens investing toolkit from CDC. So please check those out in the chat box. And we'll come back to each of you for a final question. But before that, Vikas, we have a few questions in the chat, which I think are a little bit about applying some of that experience. So one of them is just around, are there government programs in the Global South that we should study, which perhaps are where you're seeing really supporting gender lens investing? I think the other one, which was, this question about collateral. So one of the attendees said, how do women businesses access funds without being hindered by hurdles of collateral? They had a sadly terrible experience with Grofin, where they got a loan approved, but then couldn't actually access it because they didn't have a building as collateral. And so want to hear a little bit how you're able to shift and sort of offer some of those opportunities, or if you have advice for a women-owned business who's really trying to access those funds.
Sure, Neka. Before that, I just wanted to say that as far as our group is concerned, we have made investments in women-owned businesses across the Global South, in agriculture, in textiles. But more importantly, in East Africa, we have sourced about 2,000 plus enterprises, work very closely with about 50 of them, a quarter of them being women-owned businesses, and facilitated capital to flow into these enterprises through our Sankalp convening, where we invite entrepreneurs, both men and women, to come in with their ideas around agriculture, water sanitation, financial inclusion, health, and such other spaces. Where we have a jury who sits with them. We help them get investor ready over a period of time. And with some of these companies, about 35 of them that we work with over a 3-year term, we help them grow their revenues 4.5x and help them grow their employee base by about 3x over the course of those their tenure. And as I said, about 1/4 of them were women-led businesses. So in that sense, the experience of trying to scale up businesses from scratch is a very, very long journey, where again, I re-emphasize, like a broken record, ecosystem support is extremely key. With regards to the question on governmental programs, in India, there have been a lot of government initiatives which have increased the access to capital for women entrepreneurs. These have been schemes which have looked at to give women entrepreneurs in the range of about $1,500 without any collateral, and public finance sector, public-run banks have been a key driver for this opportunity. So if Nigeria is looking for some benchmarks or some initiatives that they could potentially learn from, there are the Mudra loans in India, which have scaled up significantly and provided opportunity for women entrepreneurs to access these loans. There is another scheme called CGT MSE, which is directed towards micro, small, medium enterprises, which has again been fairly well received by the women entrepreneurs who do not have any collateral, and these are coming through public institutions. I must very clearly say that the private sector banks and the non-banking institutions are significantly behind, and it's only because of the government push that the public sector banks have taken the lead in lending to women enterprises in a sizable number to help flow of capital towards these enterprises. As far as the example that you spoke about without collateral, again, speaking from some of the other Global South experiences, there have been some non-banking financial companies who have come in existence who are looking to do cash flow based lending and not really based on collateral. It is such institutions, if they are existing in Nigeria, that women entrepreneurs who do not have collateral need to go out and reach. These institutions, non-banking financial institutions, some of them have been set up because of the active support of the developmental financial institutions that we've heard about, including the FMOs and others that were mentioned earlier. So specifically where women do not have collateral, they would need to explore institutions who are developing new tools, techniques. There are some fintech players who are looking at different credit-based models, different credit risk assessment models for women entrepreneurs without collateral. But I'm not familiar with the Nigeria market specifically, whether such institutions exist, but clearly they are present in other parts of Global South, and maybe an opportunity to learn from those models as well. Okay, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for the reflections from some of the programs that exist in India that might be relevant to study. And then this question about who are the non-bank financial institutions in the context of Nigeria, the microfinance institutions, microfinance banks. And to some extent, perhaps some of the fintechs as well who might be able to support this question about collateral. So thank you very much for that. I think that there's a number of questions we unfortunately won't be able to get to, and I'll just try and summarize them, and we'll have them on the recording to come back to, hopefully, for future conversations. One of them is this question about, in terms of gender balance, whether perhaps there are more women than men. How do we really take on things like, food insecurity and a few other issues? So I think that one is coming up. Perhaps how do we apply a gender lens to that? Another question is about what's the appetite of the government to really support gender lens investing, or even sort of mandate it, if you will, over time, and what kind of government policies perhaps can support this type of gender lens investing after the pandemic, and as we think about recovery in Nigeria. And then I think there's one question which I think Tanemba can answer directly in the Q&A chat around, whether women farmers in Nigeria can access the MBC Africa services. I think what we'll do is we'll end with just a reflection from the panel. What is the sort of pressing issue that you're really focused on for 2021, and/or what can we look forward to from your organizations around gender lens investing as we move into the new year? We can start, perhaps we'll go with Tanemba, and then to Jen, Temilade, and close with Vikas.
Okay, so to the question of our support to women farmers, we have two programs to support specifically women farmers. As I said in my presentation, we have what we call She Farms, which is a program just for women producers, and we have what we call Urban Farming Program, which is also mostly women and youth. So if they are interested, they can still contact me for that. For 2021, we are really, we're scaling our activities in gender lens investing. As I said, we started with our own money and with some angel money with the She Equity, and we're getting traction thanks to Alitea. We're getting a lot of traction both from DFIs, but also from foundations that can be very critical, especially on operational support. And hopefully we will start the West Africa venture capital or ecosystem in 2021. So She Equity West Africa will start in 2021. That's what we're concentrating on now.
Great, thank you very much. And Jen, what are you looking forward to in 2021, or what's the pressing issue that you're hoping to be addressed?
I'm really excited for 2021. CDC has made an active commitment to build our gender finance portfolio, which means doing some of the things we have already been doing, focusing on microfinance, moving more to directed lending and providing directed credit lines for women, and helping banks to underwrite differently for women borrowers. And very, very importantly, we are taking a hard look at women-led gender lens funds. And this is something that CDC has traditionally had challenges investing in. I think Alithea's experience is perfectly exemplifies how LPs like CDC and other DFIs have been challenged to get into gender lens funds, largely because DFIs didn't really understand a gender lens strategy. We've moved from that place, and now I think we are ready to begin moving capital into gender lens, gender-focused funds, which will help us amplify our capital more broadly out into women supporting businesses.
Thank you very much for those reflections. Temilade, so 2021, and yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. So looking forward, we are looking to, we're in the last stages of due diligence to finally close our fund at 100 million. We're currently at 75, so that's very exciting for us to be able to close that fundraising chapter and begin to or continue to realize aims of unearthing these investments, but also, and more particularly to myself, what I look forward to is in capturing the value that women bring. So not just in terms of dollars and cents and numbers in terms of jobs, etc., but the difference that gender diversity brings in workplaces and in value chains, etc. So in reporting, reporting is usually focused on numbers, and we capture quite well the quantitative aspects. But what my challenge is going forward is capturing the qualitative and expressing that in a succinct way that is systemic, that applies across the board, and just unearthing those finer things that gender, because we are not the same, and that's just the truth. So it's moving beyond counting women to expressing the value of women for our investors and for our investees as well.
Thank you very much. And Vikas, looking forward to 2021 and or pressing issues that you want to see addressed next year.
Yeah, so the one single line item that we are espousing is that data is the new gold or new oil. And we need to all make sure that we are following gender disaggregated data analysis. Our financial institutions are repositories of a significant amount of data. And if that can be disaggregated and analyzed and leveraged to be able to help develop new products and services that could help mobilize more access to capital for women enterprises, that's something that's going to be a key step forward. So leveraging data, understanding digital transactions, enabling all women-owned, women-run businesses, micro, small, medium enterprises to get onto the digital architecture and digitize their data and digitize their transactions is the one thing that we are really espousing for the next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for the reflections. I think I'm hearing a lot of, positive energy in the move into next year. I think perhaps all of us need that positivity. And I think seeing these questions about how do we build additional data sets and share those publicly, share those resources so others can really see what's happening in gender lens investing versus those of us who are investing, perhaps having a good sense that there is something there. Questions about how do you really deepen some of the existing portfolios, whether that's in terms of extending credit lines or closing the fund at $100 million. And for Tonemba and Shequity, really getting into that broader West Africa investment fund. So I think a lot of excitement there. I think from my perspective, I'm very much looking forward to applying gender lens investing in Nigeria, deepening gender lens investments in the country as well as across Africa, and perhaps seeing what can be learned from this focus on gender lens investing for impact investing more broadly, whether that's around some of these issues around things like Black funding equity, or it's around other type of areas that really need to be further addressed. So very excited to see that we have some tools and the path already being sort of marked for us by a number of the panelists and their work. So thank you all so much for sharing your reflections. I'll just quickly introduce a video which is coming next and then hand it over to Maria to introduce the next panel. But we had invited as well a representative from a national advisory board from Zambia, Dalika Banda, who is also very deeply involved in gender lens investing and sits on a number of boards. We'll allow her to introduce herself through this slide and then on the video as well.
As far as gender is concerned, fund managers, we tend to think of, on the gender side, we tend to think of women as only recipients of investment capital. We don't think of them as asset holders and providers of capital in their own right. So for me, one of the biggest lessons, and unfortunately I keep going on, harping on about the same people, but that's because the market remains narrow and very, very small, because we have not broken this barrier yet. So female-owned fund managers, Alithea, IDF here in South Africa, DPI, which is the one we all talk about with Runa Alam. These funds Runa has done a little bit better, but in her early years, she will tell you it was an upward slog to try and get funding. For these others, it's an 8-year, sometimes 10-year process to just get LPs and partners into their fund structures. And yet, to me, if you really, really want to elevate and accelerate the reach to women, you know that if you have a woman-owned business, she's going to have affinity. Of course, she's going to make some hard-nosed business decisions, but she's going to have a much more natural understanding of a female underlying investee company than a male-owned company would. And again, I don't mean this to be disparaging. I think it's just the reality in which we live. And so I think that, first of all, look at the female asset holders on the African continent and work with them. Work with them, and CDC also has been very good at this historically, which is to create markets. We need to create a marketplace for this. But there's also the investor. In Zambia, the one that always comes to mind for me is Monica Musonda with Java Foods, because many people can relate in this region with her. She struggles to get funding. And she's managed to get over it, but that's just because many males actually stepped up and took her personal risk and said, we will do this with you. So she's now moved on from importing noodles to actually manufacturing noodles to actually doing nutritious cereals, etc. Sahel in Nigeria, which is Ndidi and her husband, sorry, I have to say Ndidi and her husband, but which is good for a change, right? It's the other way around. They are doing some amazing things in the food industry, but they still have to position themselves for a particular type of funding. So we, as a community, I think if GSG can achieve one thing, and if the 2X community can achieve one thing, it is to de-risk perception-wise and structurally the debt, equity, lending, investment facility, the financial tools that are out there. De-risk this asset class that we call women-owned businesses and women in business. And there are many financial tools with which you can do that. You can invest, and now I see as well, Financial Sector Deepening Africa, which is a UK FCDO-funded organization in the region. They are actually in the process of issuing, in the same way they did green bonds, they now want to do a gender bond. So that we need to look at the different financial instruments to make this work. The financial sector has got to step up. I always say the financial sector is a definer and a big transformer of markets. And so when everybody said microfinance was the way to go, it was the financial sector that made it happen. When everybody said SMEs, it was the financial sector that made it happen. When we started talking about green bonds, it's the financial sector that makes it. Greening the economy is the financial sector. So now we're talking about women, the financial sector has got to step up.
Thank you very much to the first panel session. And I'd like to call on Nneka Chime to lead the second panel discussion, which is Gender Lens Investing, sharing experiences in supply and demand for capital. Nneka Chime, I'd like to hand over to you to continue the session.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you to my namesake Nneka for leading the first panel discussion. It was very engaging, and I actually learned a lot from that and from all our panelists. So thank you. So welcome to the second panel discussion. We'll be building on some of the topics that were discussed both by our keynotes and by the first set of panelists. So by introduction, I'm Nneka Chime. I'm a principal at Cross Boundary Group in Nigeria. And Cross Boundary Group is a firm that is really an investment advisory firm with a mission to really unlock capital to create a lasting change and impact in frontier and underserved markets. So we work across sub-Saharan Africa and several other countries around the globe. We have an office in Iraq, we've done work in Afghanistan, we have offices in the Middle East, in North Africa, the US and UK as well. So we work with a lot of investors and a lot of donor partners as well to really channel capital to areas where they can drive high impact. And over the course of our history, we've been able to facilitate about $700 million in closed transactions in these markets that we serve, which are really the underserved and frontier markets. So I'm joined today by a very exciting lineup of women and Jessie, who have really been active in terms of pioneering gender lens investing on the continent, either as advisors or working directly on the field with women and hearing their stories and seeing things firsthand. And then we also have some that have started funds that focus on women. So I think we'll have a lot of interesting perspectives to share. And I will actually turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves one by one, starting with Yemi Carey. And I would also ask everyone, as you go through your introductions, it would be great if you could also tell us why GLI is important to you personally. So Yemi, let me hand it over to you to kick off with an introduction.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm really glad to be here amongst these women who are doing major things in accelerating investments for women. My name is Yemi Carey. I run an IT consulting firm. That's what I used to earn my living. But the other hat is I run Rising Tide Africa. Rising Tide Africa is a female angel investment network. And what we do is try and galvanize women to become angel investors so that we are able to show that angel investing can also become an asset class. Investing to earn at a later time, but also giving an impact to the female entrepreneur, whether they are female owned or female led or gender diverse, or even if you are male and you're providing services for women, the women ecosystem. So that is really what I do. Why is it important for us to have gender lens in investing? In answering this question, what I would like to say is that there is a sort of social mindset when you think about the women. And whether people say that women run riskier businesses, or whether they are risk adverse, or whether they don't have the capacity or capabilities to run their business, or whether it is that they think that the women-led businesses are really in the smaller, lower cadres or the informal sector. It is important that we understand that innately women have, I won't say more responsibility, but they have a lot of the lifestyle issues that really does affect their decision making, the lifestyle issues that makes them want to do things that will impact others empathically, and as such, by doing this, indirectly they are really galvanizing the ecosystem, the economy of wherever environment they're in. Now, for them to be able to succeed, they would first and foremost try to have better savings, because of course they will allocate their incomes basically to the families first and foremost before they look into any other things. And so it is a domino effect. If we have investments accessible to women, that the environment, first of all, the households, and thereafter the economy, in the immediate economy, and then the economy at large, will be able to develop and have an accelerated growth. So I think it is important. It is important that we focus on this. The time, well, we have only just started, and I think that when we begin to see a major shift and there becomes more access to finance, then we begin to know that we are there, and we're in our drive to increase access to capital.
Thank you so much, Yemi, and excited to unpack some of these issues that and ideas that you touched on. Also, I'm a direct beneficiary of your vision as a member of the Rising Tide network, and I have to say it's a fantastic initiative and truly impactful. Great, thank you so much, Yemi. So I'll hand over to Adesua. So Adesua, please introduce yourself and then also summarize why this discussion is important.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to be amongst my esteemed panelists. So I'm Adesua Akumbo Rhodes. I'm the founder of Arua Capital Management. We are a growth, equity, and gender lens fund, investing in early stage businesses that are established and rapidly growing, but need access to growth capital to unlock the next stage of their growth. We invest in Nigeria and Ghana, and we have a very intentional gender lens, meaning that we invest in businesses that either provide goods and services that improve women's lives in some way, or we invest in businesses that are founded by women, have gender diverse management teams, or have women that are active in the supply chain. And I would say for us, we're currently deploying capital and also raising our first fund. So we're kind of we're deploying capital, but also know some of the challenges of raising a first-time gender lens fund in Africa as well. But so I think for us, it's very, very important. I've been on the road trying to raise this fund now for the last 6 years. So I think for us, it's very, very important to be investing with a gender lens because there is such a lack of women as capital allocators on the continent. So the reason that I left my comfortable desk that I miss sometimes, my comfortable desk at JP Morgan, and spun out of my previous fund to specifically focus on raising a gender lens fund, is because I've seen firsthand the challenges that women face when they're looking to raise capital. And I think it's already been discussed to some extent on the previous panel in terms of the unconscious biases that women face. And for me, it was a very easy correlation that I made, that until we address the gender imbalances amongst capital allocators on the continent, where to my last count, there are less than 10 private equity funds in the whole of the African continent that are owned or led by women. Until we address that imbalance, we're going to have a continent where we make up, women make up 50% of the population and are only contributing to less than 40% of GDP. We're going to have a continent where 1 in 4 women are starting or managing businesses, but only 2% can access capital. We're going to have a continent where women face a $320 billion credit gap. So these are some of the issues that I looked at, and I thought that in order to be able to address these imbalances that we see in society, where there are very, very striking and concerning gender gaps in society, we need to have women that are capital allocators and have women-owned funds, women fund managers that are deploying capital into businesses that are either for women or by women. So it's very, very it's a very, very close and dear subject to me, and I think that for us, as we've seen from our recent investment, and we'll be announcing more investment soon, we're very, very conscious and intentional about showcasing the opportunities that exist, both from a financial return perspective, but also from a social impact and women empowerment perspective, when you have women allocating capital and when you have a very specific gender lens. And I'll be able to talk a little bit more about some of the opportunities and challenges that we see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adeswa. I'm really looking forward to hearing from your vast pool of experiences as we go further in this panel. So thank you. So I'll move on to Jessie Baver now. So Jessie, would you please introduce yourself and also please answer the question of why this topic is important to you in 2 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you, Nneka. Thank you, Maria, for organizing this. So my name is Jessie Baver. I'm an associate partner with Dalberg Advisors, which, as Nneka, as I mentioned on the last panel, is a mission-driven strategy advisory firm that focuses exclusively on issues of economic and social development. So I spend most of my time in our development finance practice, working with a range of DFIs like CDC, for example, as well as other types of impact and commercial investors, primarily focusing on West and East Africa. So in terms of why gender lens investing is important to me, I think we've been on a journey as a firm over the last couple of years to really take an intentional gender lens to all of our projects. And I think that's been driven by 2 main reasons. First is just an issue of justice and an issue that it's the right thing to do. So when we look in all of the sectors that we care about as a firm, whether that's education or health or agricultural productivity or financial inclusion, we see that unfortunately women face greater rates of exclusion and greater rates of lack of access to resources than men do. And so just trying to address those gaps is central to our mission and to the reason that I joined Dalberg. Then the other reason is just really that taking a gender lens and being intentional about it just helps us deliver better results. And so spending the time to really think and understand the context of different situations in different markets and why women face exclusion or the different challenges that women face compared to men just helps us deliver better thinking for our clients and ultimately better impact. And then I guess the flip side of that, which to kind of end on a positive note, is really that what I found is that the way I see it is that if you have a situation where a huge portion of the market is underserved and is excluded and is not being served by traditional means, then that's a major market opportunity for any business and any investor that is willing to overcome that gap and understand what drives that gap and figure out how to invest it. So to me, I see it also as not just a challenge, but also a significant opportunity. So that's why it's quite important to me.
Thank you so much, Jessie, and for really summarizing all those really important points. It's fundamentally the right thing to do. There's no reason why we should exclude 50% of the population from the same opportunities that the other 50% have, right? And then also pointing out the significant market opportunities. So thank you for that introduction. And I will call Thelma Ekio now.
Hello, Nneka. Hello, everyone. Thanks to Maria and IIF for inviting us to be part of this important conversation. As I was introduced, my name is Thelma Ekio. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of SMENG. We call ourselves Nigeria's Impact Investing Platform, and the reason for that is I was happy to hear Tenemba also talk about the ecosystem approach. We looked at it and said, what makes us indigenously African? How can we say we're a gender lens fund in Africa? And it was important for us to combine both addressing what we felt were the institutional deal origination challenges that women-owned businesses have with actual investing. And so we have 2 funds. We have a bottom of the pyramid fund called the AB Fund, and we invest in small, quasi, and micro women's businesses through aggregated platforms. And then we have a top tier women's fund called the Women's Investment Fund. And the way it works is we have a feeder accelerator as our pipeline developer to debunk this myth that they're not investable women's businesses. We wanted to start off by doing that. And to date, we have 200 women's businesses that have successfully passed through the accelerator. Why is gender lens investing important? I was really pleased to hear Vickers talk about patriarchy. I never hear even women talk about gender lens investing within the context of patriarchy, because that is what it is. Gender lens investing is changing the status quo, an enshrined status quo of discrimination of women particularly from investing and accessing finance. And we're talking in Nigeria, so we're looking at the African context. Poverty is a stranglehold on women. Poverty robs women of their choices, their options, and also it's generational. Gender lens investing is not for the particular woman entrepreneur, it's also for generations after her. In our research in establishing our funds, we couldn't find up to 5 women-owned businesses that had been passed from one generation to the next. That is very sad for a country like Nigeria with over 200 million people. And that is the narrative across the continent. And so for us, gender lens investing is not just a business approach. It's not just a strong, viable investment strategy. It's also a necessary part of deconstructing patriarchal structures in the country and across Africa. I come from the African Women's Movement. I worked in 22 African countries. I was part of the initial group that started the African Feminist Movement. So my ideology is really informed, and the philosophy behind what I do is really being informed for what I've seen on the ground, working in all these countries as a donor, as an impact investor, and now being a fund manager myself. Once again, the fact that Adesua, what Adesua alluded to, I'll bring it home. The fact that in Nigeria, you can only count 4 women co-owned funds just tells you how, first of all, how difficult it is to do, because, the difficulty of this is something that we kind of brush aside, but it's extremely difficult to do. But also the fact that it's still, in theory, gender lens investing sounds good, but in practice, the commitment to investing in women-owned funds and by translation, women entrepreneurs has not really worked. So for us, it has given a name, a global framework to something that many of us have been working on for years, but it also has put a lens in terms of how discriminatory capital flow is to the continent and in particular to women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thelma, for that. Yeah, really, really important themes you really touched on. It's fundamentally about using this as a tool to really tackle the patriarchy, especially in a country like Nigeria, where we have some deeply enshrined issues, some of which are even, as far as our laws, really, putting women, on an uneven playing field. So I love the angle of using investments and to generate equity to tackle this, and love to hear more about your views down the line. Okay, last but not least, I'll call on Ariane Martins Rodriguez to give us our introduction.
Hello, thank you, Neka. Thank you, Maria, for the invitation. Hello, fellow panelists and everyone. So first of all, my name is Ariane Martin. I have been dedicating the past 15 years of my life to the economic empowerment of women, basically working in different countries, particularly with women living in the bottom of the pyramid and using women economic empowerment. The last 2 years, I have been supporting the GIZ with their Nigeria Competitiveness Program, mainly focused on access to finance, which is supported by the European Union delegation, which is very keen on this. So first of all, why is this important? I have been dedicating the past 15 years of my life to achieving gender equality, which I believe is the whole point. So gender lens investing is just another strategy to achieve gender equality, just like women economic empowerment, gender mainstreaming, or gender parity. And for me, that is the reason why it is important. It's just a human rights obligation, period. We all should have the same opportunities. However, I agree with what many others of you have also said, which is it is a tremendous opportunity. So as a starting point, if we want to achieve 2030 agenda, we must focus, or one of the biggest opportunities is to focus on closing those gender gaps that many of you have mentioned. For example, the labor gender gap, we all know would bring significant GDP increase to the worldwide economies. The credit gap for women would trigger business development. But also looking at the female economy, what's called, women entrepreneurs plus women consumers. This has been called by Goldman Sachs like the most significant emerging market. It has such a potential purchasing power. So also, many people have mentioned gender diverse teams and the potential that these have to trigger profitability. So in a nutshell, it is good for business, it is good for investment, it is good for society. So for me, it's a no-brainer. And it's just something that was nice to have And I think it's becoming a must-have. So if we want to recover from COVID-19 crisis, this recovery, as some people have also mentioned, if we want to build it back better, it must be inclusive. It must include a gender lens focus. So I'll leave it there, but that is what I believe, or why I think it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that really powerful introduction. So since you touched on COVID-19, so I actually wanted to go back to Thelma, because I know that you've been doing a lot of work in terms of COVID-19 recovery and looking at how it's impacted women and trying to also, advise the government and work with the, I believe it's the Ministry of Women Affairs on this angle. So can you maybe tell us some of your recent experiences? How has COVID-19 really affected women, and what are some of the things that you think we can do to build back better, as Ariane mentioned?
Yeah, thank you. So when COVID happened, like everyone else, it threw us off. And we knew that one of the things that we say as a firm is that our strategies are important, but we also have to be nimble enough to adjust to the real needs of women on the ground. So immediately we decided to conduct a national survey of the impact of COVID on women during the lockdown. And what I hope one of the things we highlight, it hasn't really come out, is the importance of collaborating with government to do impact investing. It's extremely important, and gender lens investing. So we contacted the Minister for Women Affairs and the Nigerian Chambers of Commerce, and we all agreed that it was an important national survey to conduct on the impact of COVID on women. And I'm pleased that the findings of that survey is now part of informing the Nigerian response vis-a-vis COVID. But some of the things that came out from the survey was, one, at the time and shortly after that, the absence of women from the development of stimulus packages, which were completely skewed. Ariane talked about gender mainstreaming. One of the lessons from those of us who've actually studied gender and gender mainstreaming is where you are not explicit with women, it's overlooked. And so none of the stimulus packages actually spelled out the peculiar challenges that women were facing vis-a-vis the pandemic. The second thing that the survey revealed was that the sectors where women predominantly operate, hospitality, catering, small trading businesses, suffered the longest lockdown period. And it takes women's businesses 5 times longer than men's businesses to start and grow. And if we go by the data from the African Development Bank, that COVID is predicted to erase 10 years of progress that have been made vis-a-vis women empowerment, then we're talking about certain sectors that may never recover. The last thing I want to highlight is that the survey revealed was the gender divide, digital gender divide that exists in Nigeria. So it's very easy for businesses in Lagos, Abuja, Kano, some parts of Kano to just quickly adapt to using online services or putting their businesses on Instagram. But just to let you know, 5 states in Nigeria couldn't participate in our survey because they simply couldn't access the internet. And that just shows you that there are 2 different Nigerias. I hope we address that. So a lot of what we talk about are not really representative often of half of the country, and more than 70% of the women tend not to be taken into consideration in the development of responses. And so we as SMENG, we decided that we should, whilst we have our main funds, we should create a facility that primarily helps the women in our portfolio, in our pipeline, which spread across 10 states in Nigeria, to recover from the impact of COVID. And so we set up a COVID recovery facility, and we're very pleased that we have a number of financial institutions, an African DFI and an international donor that has come on board or expressed intentions to come on board in early 2021 to support those women's businesses. The main thing that we learned from this exercise was that, there is an urgent need. Since this particular conference is about COVID, there's an urgent need for recovery targeted interventions. There will be the time to continue the normal investing, but there is an urgent need to triage, if you want, to stopgap, to bridge what has happened with COVID, because we talk about we're like every other part of the world. Nigeria has unique challenges, even without COVID, in terms of the conducive environment for entrepreneurs to work in. COVID has just exacerbated that difficulty. And so how do we ensure that women, we're talking about access to finance, COVID has happened, but people are still using pre-COVID lens to lend to women. There's really not much change. And so how do we ensure that the strategies and the responses and the facilities that come as a result of COVID are really targeted to this recovery component, to this triaging component, so that there is a sector of women entrepreneurs that are still available for us to invest in when the world finally gets back to normal and we can invest. So that has been our approach. And I think those lessons, we're happy to see that more and more now. I'm part of a group set up by UN Women that is trying to get women into decision making at the highest levels of the government to help with the new stimulus packages that are set to come out in early next year, and also the new funds that the government is going to bring out to be available for on lending to women. We haven't really talked about debt. That's another thing, that's an approach that should be looked at in terms of gender lens investing, and some of those things will be announced next year. So there's an advocacy part of our work right now in trying to make sure that those facilities really have a gender lens, and not just for high-performing women's businesses, but the very small businesses that do not even, most women's businesses operate in the informal sector. So how do we ensure that those businesses are elevated to be even part of the conversation? Our funds are not designed to reach them, but when we're talking about gender lens, it should be big enough to incorporate different types of strategies to reach women exactly where they are. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can see you have been working on a lot of resources. Maria, if it's not part of the plan, it would be great to collate some of these resources and really disseminate them. From what Thelma has shared and what some of the earlier panelists shared, I think there's a wealth of information and knowledge that can be shared. So it'd be great as a follow-on to this event if we can maybe work on that and get people to have access to that. Okay, I'll move on to Yemi now. So Yemi, you've really been on both sides because you're an entrepreneur and you also founded the Rising Tide, and I know you're also a member of the Lagos Angels network as well. So we would love to hear from you, what practical ways can female entrepreneurs access finance for their businesses, especially in the challenging COVID-19 era that Thelma has so graciously highlighted.
I would start from when we're talking about female businesses. Majority of it is in the informal sector. When we move away from the capitals, the major capitals, then you begin to see the essence of women and all of the things that we're talking about, social lives of women. It is there you see that they're the breadwinners. It is there you see that they're the ones that try and control the resources and their environment. And so for me, there are different layers of access to finance. How does the woman that is going to the farm, that is earning very little just to sustain her family, have access to finance to develop and scale her businesses, whether it is that she's a farmer on the land, or if she's selling, trading, and all of that. How does she access the finance? How do we know who we are financing? A lot of the times there are statistics that come out. 70% of Nigerians all of those statistics. How deep down the bottom of the pyramid did they really survey for them to come up with this? I have seen what there's this lady, Mama Money, what she's doing, and what she does is give out what we will term as tokens to these women. However, it keeps them surviving, and it allows for them to scale up. Now that is at the very bottom of the pyramid, and then there's the bottom of the pyramid, those that have access to what they call the USSD and are doing some level of trading, and these are people that were really adversely affected because when they shut down or the lockdown came and the pandemic came, they didn't have access to food. I'm not talking about capital.
I'm talking about access to survival. So even, and that is one layer. And then there is the layer of the women that really do trade. A lot of women do buying and selling. A lot of trade goes on. And these are women that, if well educated and if well informed, they will fall into the bracket of those that angel investors can even look into the businesses. Or we call it pre-seed and, ideation, all of those areas. Now, these women, because of taxes, a lot of them are not banked. A lot of this trading, and they're not banked. And because, and there's a lot of economic development going on in that tier. Now, then comes those that we as angel investors are providing for, and what we do look at is we used to look at pre-seed, and what informed Rising Tide was really that the ability for a woman to project her business in a manner in which an investor will be endeared to invest was not there. There is a certain type of way. Like right now, they train, people train women how to pitch so that they can attract investors. Now, for a woman, she's coming out there sincerely to say, this is why I'm doing this is what I'm doing, and this is how I'm doing it. Now, you are looking at it, how does it scale? What is the business model? She's not thinking about. A lot of times, they because of the type of risk adverseness that is inherent in the woman, she's thinking of growing organically. However, the investors are looking at how they will exit in the next 2 or 3 years. So there is a gap in that. And that is where we came in to try and nurture and educate these women, that you have to look beyond the immediate of how much you're going to get, $40,000, $50,000, whereas a man will come and tell you the long term, I want $1 million, and so we try to educate them around that time so that we can when Vikas talked about the ecosystem approach, it's all encompassing, because when you begin to mentor them, when you begin to look at whether they want debt or equity, when you begin to look at how sustainable the business is, and you begin to listen also to, because a lot of times you start going personal when you mentor, when you look at where they're coming from, the lack of information, all of those things are what access to finance should be addressing. Before you talk about you want to hand over the cash, all of those softer things are the things that would make access to finance for a woman more attractive to investors. Because by the time we build a woman to that level, or a female entrepreneur, or those providing for women to that level that they're investable, then the rest is history. We know the statistics, because when she goes in to do that business and the finance is no longer an issue, success is at the end of the tunnel. So all of these things is what we need to look. In terms of COVID, it did affect down to.
But thank you so much. It's clearly a topic you're very passionate about. So I'm sure we hear a lot more, and would love to. I'll move on to Jessie now. So Jessie, I know you've done a lot of work in terms of GLI mainstreaming. You mentioned you've worked with a lot of development partners as well. So it'd be great to hear some practical insights from your perspective on how GLI could be mainstreamed.
Sure. So I think the one thing that I wanted to talk about today is I do most of my work on the debt side of things. So working with a variety of local financial institutions and investors in terms of providing debt capital to SMEs and entrepreneurs. And the challenge with debt capital, unlike equity, is that the financiers are, they're not really worried about the upside. They're mainly, they're not focused on the upside. They're mainly worried about avoiding risk and, doing their business in the most efficient way possible. So every time we have conversations with them, about increasing access to finance for underserved groups and especially increasing access to finance for women, there's often an understanding, from a business perspective, they see, yes, in the long term, this is a great opportunity, and yes, these businesses are good, and sure, I'd love to go out and make more loans to women entrepreneurs. But the challenge they come back to, and they'll the local banks I talk to will always say, well, my risk department doesn't want me to do this, or I have portfolio disbursement targets that I need to meet. I need to originate a certain amount of loans, and so they just end up picking the safe bets and picking the sectors that they know well, picking the types of businesses that they've served in the past, and not really growing their portfolios. And so one of the things that we've been working on in the last couple of years is actually taking that information and having a real honest conversation with donors and governments and saying, look, increasing access to finance for underserved groups, and especially increasing access to finance for women, it's really going to have significant benefits for your society, for your economy in the long run. But the banks and local investors have pressures of their own from a business perspective in terms of hitting their targets. And so what if we could just bring the two sides together and unlock a amount of donor catalytic capital, and basically tell lenders and financiers that we value the impact of lending to women. And so one of the models where we've been trying to put that into place is an initiative called ASELI Africa, which is something focused on agricultural SMEs. So it's operating in East Africa now, and we've kind of worked on setting it up over the past 2 to 3 years. And the fundamental goal of ASELI Africa is to actually take a small amount of donor capital and just pay targeted incentives to lenders that are going out there and taking slightly more risks and going and expanding their portfolio and serving new customers, so especially women-owned agri-SMEs. And so we use the 2X criteria that Jen spoke about on the first panel, and we basically provide local banks with just a small amount of incremental revenue and incremental risk guarantees or credit guarantees if they go out and lend to businesses that are owned by women or employing large numbers of women, or serving women as consumers. And so that small amount of capital, with that kind of catalytic donor capital, we can basically achieve 15x or 20 times, 15 or 20 times leverage. And so you can mobilize a $2,000 or $3,000 incentive for a local bank and convince them to lend $50,000 or $100,000 to a women-owned business. And it's just a small amount of capital, but that actually helps get that loan approved internally, and basically helps the lender make the case internally that yes, this is a viable business model. And so we hope that business model can be replicated in other markets. I think West Africa and especially Nigeria is probably the natural next destination for ASELI. And the other important thing to note is it's not meant to be a permanent subsidy. It's not meant to just be a subsidy so that banks can basically increase their profits. It's just meant to recognize that going into a new market is inherently expensive and challenging, and it involves some risks. And so rather than donors and governments just sitting on the sidelines and telling banks that they should, this is a way for both sides to come together and work together to actually just make some of these initial loans and learn about lending to women-owned businesses and learn that it's actually women are great customers and actually lower risk and offer significant growth opportunities. And then over time, we can kind of phase those subsidies out. So I think that approach, building on the work that Jen and that CDC and FinDev and the other DFIs have done with the 2X challenge, and just saying, we'll start with these criteria, and we'll offer, if you're a local bank and you want to support women-owned businesses, but you find it operationally challenging or financially challenging, we'll give you just a little bit of short-term support to get you over the hurdle. I really see that as a very catalytic way of increasing access to finance in markets like Nigeria and across Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Definitely. So and thank you, Neka, for posting the link. I was actually about to ask how to spell ASELI. So I think this would be a good point to pivot to Adesua. So Jesse has highlighted, sometimes there's a tension really between meeting gender lens goals and what the private lender is really looking for in terms of their returns. So I'd love to hear from you how you think of this trade-off, or do you even see a trade-off?
We don't see a trade-off at all. We actually see our gender lens investing strategy as a value driver. We see it as a way to enhance returns. And I think the way that we've been able to convince investors to invest in our fund is we really position it as an untapped investment opportunity. It is, the fact that we're able to invest in businesses that are improving the lives of women and girls, invest in businesses in hidden sectors of the economy that have been overlooked and underserved. I think in the presentation earlier, you saw some of the statistics that are often referenced. Women control $15 trillion of global consumer spending. The growth from in Africa that's going to happen over the next 50 years is going to come from internal consumption. It's going to come from rapid urbanization. It's going to come from increasing population growth. And a lot of those investment decisions and spending decisions are going to be made by women. So as a woman that's allocating capital, I'm 3 times more likely, according to the data, to invest in another woman. And as a woman allocating capital, I'm also I believe, better inclined to identify attractive businesses that are producing goods and services that I would use. So we really see it as an untapped investment opportunity, one where I think the data is now out there, data from IFC that says, gender diverse senior investment teams are generating 20% more return than their male counterparts. The data from McKinsey is out there about, an addition to $28 trillion of GDP if the gender gaps are bridged. McKinsey also tell us that, the companies that have gender diverse senior teams are, 21% more likely to experience above average profitability, 30 to 40% increase in portfolio valuations for gender diverse teams. First round capital, I think they said, female founders have performed 63% better than all male founder teams. So the data, I think, is now out there. That definitely not a trade-off having a gender investment strategy. You can have a gender investment strategy that is actually a value driver because of the untapped potential that women represent, but also because of the fact that investing in gender diverse teams just brings diversity of thought, helps to reduce risk, helps to improve profitability. So for us, we have a very, very specific gender investing framework. We're not investing in seed, we're not investing in pre-revenue. This is growth equity as well. So I think that's one way that we help our investors also de-risk some of these investments is, we're investing in established businesses that have already proven their business model, and they're just looking for that next stage of growth capital. And I think that's something that we should also deconstruct when we think about gender lens investing. There are different types of gender lens investing. You may be investing in, like us, businesses, So there are different types of gender lens investing. So, you may be investing for, advancing women's leadership, investing in only businesses that are founded by women. So all the different types of investing, gender lens investing, as well as the stage of the investment. Is it seed? Is it pre-revenue? Is it Series A? Is it Series B? Is it growth? They all have their different challenges as well. So I think for us, we see it as a value driver. It's definitely not a trade-off. And not only is it a value driver, it's also a social impact multiplier. And I think people have mentioned, the moral reasons for investing in women, but also, when a woman is empowered, when you invest in a woman, she's reinvesting 90% of her income back into healthcare, back into education. These are significant multipliers of poverty alleviation, just given the significant role women play. So I know we're running out of time. So to wrap up, it's a value driver, but it's also a very, very significant multiplier when you think about social impact as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adesua, especially for pointing out, there are different players in the ecosystem. We have folks like you that understand the sector, and you're really looking to make an impact. All your stats clearly. And then we have folks like the local banks that are just, trying to just get their interest and they don't want to take risk. And then we have folks that build an ecosystem through accelerators and really trying to really target all angles. And we need every one of you in this ecosystem. Okay, so I'll hand over to Ariane to just help us close this session. Really, I know Ariane, you've been very active working with women at the grassroots level. So it'd be great if you can, just share your experiences. What have you observed from the field? Make this conversation real for some of us that haven't actually been to those front lines.
Yes, sure, Nneka. So like I mentioned, my experience is more on women economic empowerment focused on the micro level. So talking about micro entrepreneurs, but I feel that there are a lot of parallelisms and things that can be extrapolated when you think about women-led SMEs or SMEs working for addressing women's products and services. So if you think about shortage of pipeline generally on impact investing, right? Think about shortage of pipeline for women-led, women-owned, or women servicing SMEs. I mean, this is what I think we can learn from the micro-level experience. So most of you have mentioned how important access to finance is. And so looking at a more bottom-up approach instead of a top-down approach, access to finance is definitely the first stepping stone. Like in my experience, it's just the thing, but it's not enough, as you've mentioned. And, when I was working with all these women, you said, okay, first you need a loan, but then you realize if you don't give education, financial and business education, maybe the loan doesn't have as much impact. And so you think then maybe with that, they can access bigger loans, and then they can build a slight credit history and eventually open a bank account and maybe get a loan from a bank, kind of a progress towards financial inclusion, which is a big gap that we face as well. So let me give you some examples of things that need to happen other than just the accessing the money that are important and that I think are relevant for gender lens investing as well. So for instance, in Indonesia, one woman in a savings group said, I need a bigger loan for my business, but the group won't give it to me. So will you help me? So we helped her with a business plan, with the credit history that we built with the information from the savings group. So we went to the bank. Bank was surprised. Of course, we will give her the loan. Gave her the loan. And then 6 months after that, she came to us and said, I'm going to finalize the loan payment because I don't want to have any relationship with the bank anymore. So this woman told us that the way that she felt she was being treated at the bank, she felt that they didn't trust her, so she didn't trust her. She felt scared every time she went there, and she never, ever returned to the bank. She paid and never returned. Other examples in Nigeria, just to give you some ideas of what women face, it's not only about having the money, but the things that need to change around in the whole ecosystem that will enable this gender lens investing to thrive. So in Nigeria, when I was doing this work for the Nigerian Competitiveness Program I mentioned from the German corporation, I interviewed women tomato farmers and women leather artisans, the very bottom of the pyramid. To my surprise, all of these women had a bank account, right? Some of them because they needed to get their wage paid through the bank account, others because they just wanted a safe place to save their money and then to access those savings. So what I was surprised is that really they were not using the bank account. One of the women said, listen, I opened it, but then every time I go to the ATM, there's no money. I have to go to the office, it's far away. When I get there, it's closed. Or when I get there, the people who attend to me, they just don't understand my needs. So all in a nutshell, what was happening is we have all these women who are not unbanked, but underbanked. So they've got a bank account, but they're just not using it because we are not succeeding in addressing and meeting their financial product and services needs. Right? So it's not just about having an account, but making sure that we are providing them with all the needs they've got. So I think somebody mentioned the financial sector needs to step up here. I think this is critical. So things like banks making sure, financial institutions and services providers, mainstreaming gender, making sure that they understand what women need. Just like when, in the early days of microcredits and the microfinance world, nobody was giving loans to agricultures, to farmers, because it was too risky, until somebody actually started looking into farmers and saying, well, we need to understand them, they need a grace period. And now everybody just thinks, oh, this is a no-brainer. But this was not, this is something, knowledge that they didn't have before. So this is the same thing. We need to understand what women need. We need to understand their requirements, the different expectations. We need to adapt the whole ecosystem. So some habits might need to change, some cultural norms might need to be, revisited, even some legislations. And, people have mentioned closing those gaps, whether it is digital, labor force, whatever it is, those will help the thriving of gender lens investing. But on its own, I think it will not succeed completely. So I hope that was clear, but that would be my suggestion to the industry in general.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that very, very important perspective. So we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. So I want to actually give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. So if does anyone have any questions? I see 2, okay. So Daniel, looks like Daniel wants to find out from Adesua in terms of her success in investing in agribusinesses led by women. Adesua, do you want to answer that?
Hi, so we're actually currently reviewing a deal in Nigeria that is within agribusiness. It's a significant part of their value chain. It's in northern Nigeria. A significant part of their value chain are obviously women. You know, a lot of smallholder farmers in northern Nigeria are women. And yeah, we're currently working on that investment right now, and details will be announced once it becomes public. But agribusiness is a key part of our. It's one of the key sectors we focus on as part of our investment mandate.
Thank you so much, Adesua. I see Joseph also asked the question, is there a role for policy research centers and think tanks in supporting or advancing the adoption of GLI in Nigeria? Does anyone feel inspired to take this question? What can policy research centers and think tanks do?
I'll take that. I think there is. I think empirical data is important. At the moment, a lot of the research and the data on Africa is from outside of Africa. And a lot of the reports on gender smart investing as well. One of the things that happened this year was the report by Susan Beagle on gender smart investing. That was really good. I mean, she profiled our fund, she profiled our Adesua's fund. It was really helpful to give a global, put a global light on the work that we're doing, but no one knows the amount of capital that is being driven towards gender lens investing in Nigeria. No one knows, no one has been able to map the different configurations of gender lens investing. So it'd be interesting for a think tank to take that up, do an independent assessment of the work that we're doing, look at the environment, and also the policies that need to change to make it more conducive for gender lens investing. So I think that's a really good question that I think should have, I mean, thinking of IIF, for me, that's the type of role I think IIF can play in terms of some of the internal groups that they formed on policy influencing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thelma. I was going to allocate that action item to Maria, but I see you're that. So Maria, I hope you're taking notes. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any other questions. And let me just quickly check if anyone's hand is up. Okay, so in the absence of any other questions, we have 2 minutes left. So I'll just go around all the panelists to just give a maybe a 30-second closing statement. What's one thing you want to leave the audience with? So in 30 seconds, and we can start from Yemi.
Okay, I would say female entrepreneurs are more likely to access investments if women are involved in making investment decisions. So we need more women as allocators of capital, more female angel investors, VCs, PEs, fund managers. We need to all get involved.
Thank you, Yemi. Adesua, so your 30 seconds last words for the audience.
No, I think, I'd like to end on a positive note if I can. I think that gender lens investing is getting a lot of traction. The Project Sage report that Thelma mentioned, I think, global gender lens investing funds raised is at about 4.8 billion as of 2019, up from 1.1 billion in 2017. So there's hope. There's hope, and I think that as the field grows, and we have more women as capital allocators, more women as fund managers, then I'm hopeful that there will be that trickle down to businesses that are led by women, for women, addressing issues that cater to to women. So if you're a woman-owned business, keep the faith, keep hope. There are more people that are thinking about the issues that concern you and your and the economies that you, the sectors that you care about. So that, I think that's the note that I would mention and end on, is that I'm glad that the field is gaining more traction and gaining more attention, and hoping that the money will flow from institutional investors to us.
Thank you so much. Jesse?
Sure. So I would just say that, for me, this question is all about the ecosystem. So it's not just about the investor and the business kind of out there by themselves, but it's also, everyone who is supporting that business, as Ariane mentioned, kind of, building capacity and supporting the women-owned businesses as they grow. It's also supporting the businesses that buy from and sell to these businesses. And then it's the entire ecosystem behind the investor, that all of the kind of institutional investors that are willing to support that fund manager as they go out and invest with the gender lens. And, all of that kind of needs to come together. And so I would like to leave us with this idea that we can't just think about the kind of individual transaction, but we also should think about all of the stakeholders and partners that enable that transaction, and kind of understand the role that everyone can play in sort of increasing the scope for investing towards women's economic empowerment.
Absolutely. Thelma?
Thanks, Nneka, for a good facilitation, first of all. And I think just to end by saying, I listened to CDC, and CDC started taking this seriously in 2018. FinDev started taking this seriously in 2018. And it's a really young and, focus area. Yet the requirements for female-led capital providers are asking for track record of longer periods. And that just shows you the unevenness in how we're doing this. So I'd like us to realize gender lens investors is an opportunity for a corrective. And so even from the DFIs to everyone that's involved in it, should have, when you're doing a corrective, there's a lot of courage that's involved, and to look at things outside of the norm. And I think that would be very useful in changing the dynamic of how access to finance is currently in Africa. Lastly, to say that everyone has to be invested in the success of this first phase of gender lens investing, because that's what will inform if it really becomes part of the norm rather than the exception that it still is. And I think that we in Nigeria, we shouldn't try to be like anyone else. We're responding to very unique challenges here, and we should be true to that. For those women entrepreneurs, SMENG's accelerator will start again in January. It's completely free. So I said, I encourage you to go to our website, look it up, and please, take up the opportunity to apply and attend the accelerator, because the more you improve your business, the more chances for getting investment. Lastly, there are lessons to learn from the African feminist movement in terms of taking this forward. Organizing is key. Communities of practice is very important. That's what IIF is doing today, is really, really important. And also to look for ways to reduce barrier to entry. The more women capital providers they are, the less of a strange thing that it is when we talk about it. The more successful women businesses they are, then we don't have to talk about why we should do gender lens investing. That should be our goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thelma. And then last but not least, Ariane, so your 30-second wrap up, please.
Sure. So yes, I am very happy that we had gender as a topic for today. I think that is just a very clear sign that something's happening. So it's moving from something that is nice to have to something that is must have. And I'm very happy about that, because as we've seen, it's a great opportunity. And one recommendation, maybe like I mentioned, look into the micro level experience with micro entrepreneurs in the microfinance industry, how they very soon discovered that focusing on women had much more accessing finance through women or giving loans to women had much more impact on family, businesses, and society. And I think that's something to look into, that the industry can learn a lot from. And finally, I forgot to say this, but I really think that we should look into success stories and role models that we can find in Nigeria in this case. I think it really helps to build the case even more. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, we've come to an end of the panel. Thank you so much, Maria, for giving us this opportunity. It's been a fantastic discussion. I'll hand over to you in case you want to say any words before we close.
Yeah, thank you very much to all the panelists. I really enjoyed today's session. And before I close and hand over to Dabasaki, I just want to bring out a few points. We can't have enough of this conversation on gender lens investing. I hear a lot of thoughts from the speakers today that it is a value driver, and it provides an opportunity to increase social impact, a social impact multiplier. And now is the time for gender lens investing and women to take their place as capital allocators to deploy capital by women and for women. And I also hear that it is a market opportunity which must be understood, researched in order to close the gap. And I want to end on this very important note and a lesson that I gathered from Thelma. She said that there is a need to be nimble enough to adjust to the realities of the COVID-19 pandemic and to partner and collaborate with stakeholders like government and other organizations. And on this very important note again, there is an urgent need for recovery intervention. And I'd like to point out that investors have been, like she said, I agree with her, that investors have been lending using the pre-COVID lens to lend to women in this post-COVID era. So I'd like to point out here that the IIF, in partnership with other organizations like the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, the Ford Foundation, the GIZ, MyCorp, and IBAN, came together to establish an initiative called the COVID-19, which is a framework and platform for a more coordinated response to the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on impact enterprises and MSMEs and inclusive businesses that provide critical products and services to those at the base of the pyramid. You will agree with me that there have been several interventions, programs, both by governments, the organized private sectors, to alleviate the impact of the COVID-19. But most of these interventions haven't been done in a coordinated manner that should give us the kind of impact I would like to see. In addition, they also lack the accountability and the transparency required for such programs to make the impact. So the COVID-19 Impact Consortium is a platform that brings together stakeholders from the impact investing community, philanthropic organizations, even governments, to sit down together and provide both financial and non-financial solutions to the community. We have 5 distinct pillars which I'd like to invite members of the audience to be a part of. The first is the online platform, which will be launched very soon, and is an interface between the consortium and members of the public to know about what we are doing and how we are doing what we're doing. But these other 4 pillars, which I'd like to invite you to be to join us, is the Advisory Facilitation Division, which is being led by the GIZ MyCorp, the Shared Emergency Liquidity Facility, led by the IIF, the Communication and Knowledge Dissemination Platform, and the Government Engagement Platform being led by the AVPA. If you want to know more about our work and how we are going about addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises around this period, I'll share a link on the chat box. Please put in your details. I would like to share more about this work with yourself and let you know how you can get involved. At this juncture, I'd like to call on Dabasaki Mark Ikemenjima, the Program Officer of the Ford Foundation, to give the closing remarks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Maria, for the opportunity to say a few words, and just to say thank you to all the panelists for a really engaging conversation. I think a lot has been said. I don't think you want to hear me for very long, giving all of the informative conversations that have been had so far. I just want to highlight a couple of things that I heard from the 2 panels and from the keynote speaker as well. The main question that I had is the question about the need to design investments to respond to outcomes that relate to women's lives or improve outcomes for women in Nigeria. And I think in some sense that in thinking about this particular point, there are a number of different questions that come up for me, just listening to the conversations. The first is, how do we elevate women's leadership? And I think here a lot was said about women asset holders and leaders of investment funds and women-led businesses. I think in some sense that there's some substance here in terms of thinking about how do we elevate women's leadership in this space by both providing the space and also investing in women-led businesses. So that's kind of the first question that comes up for me. The second is in terms of how do we invest in products that improve outcomes for women? And obviously there is a clear link between the first and second. In terms of the second, we would need to be thinking about how do we pay closer attention to the needs that women have in order to then design products that address existing gaps in addressing those needs. Now, to my mind, these questions actually relate to conversations that have been had in political theory. And Thelma talked a lot about, the feminist movement and spaces there. Within political theory, there have been these conversations about linking women's descriptive and substantive representation. And I think in some sense that the more we talk about women's business leadership, in some sense, we're talking about, providing presence for women in that space, creating this space for more women to be visible, to be there, to be present, to lead, to provide direction. And then, of course, the other piece with regard to substantive, representation is the question of really addressing outcomes for women. And I think, the conversation about gender-lens investing is really about improving outcomes for women by elevating political women's presence and leadership in that space. So in some sense, I think, the more that we think about the link between these two, to me, it seems like in some regard, we can think about them as both separate pieces and pieces that are related. So just a couple of things before I end, because I think Maria is eager to kick me out of this space. If we thought about presence as substantive outcome by itself, we would be right. If we thought about, outcomes in terms of products and services that benefit women, across the spectrum, whether we were thinking about education or health or economic opportunity for women, we would be right. If we were thinking about outcomes in terms of individual benefits to women business owners, whether it's in terms of their livelihoods or in terms of their social capital or in terms of their political relevance in their communities, we would be right. But I think the challenge is being able to actually make the link between all of these. And I think some of us have talked about measurement, and I cannot emphasize the need for measurement enough. Someone talked about qualitative measurement as a way to really think about what is the impact of elevating women's leadership in the investment space in terms of substantive outcome for women. I think that's something that we need to really kind of investigate and pay attention to, especially because we all recognize that, GLI is an emerging field. These questions around measurement, need to be paid attention to. Two last things before I, turn over to Maria. I think the more we think about our investments in relation to investing in women-led enterprises in general, and investing in women-led enterprises in a COVID-related era. So I'm including now and post-COVID, we need to be asking a couple of questions. One is, how do we pay attention to the more kind of the broader social concerns that women have that aren't necessarily things that we can convert into products? So in this sense, I'm thinking about things like domestic violence. How does it affect the bottom line of businesses, and how do we need to factor this in as we think about gender lens investing in Nigeria? That's one. The second is, how do we better understand the relationships between presence and substantive outcomes for women? And then the final question that I want to ask is really about measurement and thinking actually a little bit beyond the quantitative financial returns that have been mentioned a lot, in the conversations today, and really think about how gender lens investing could be an instrument to address historic social justice problems. Someone talked about patriarchy earlier that affect women in our communities across Nigeria. So I think, there's certainly opportunity for collaboration across the board. And I hope that, all of us, fund owners, philanthropy, government, and the rest of us will really be able to figure out ways to work together to elevate this field, but also to actually be able to start thinking towards, creating real opportunities for women across Nigeria. Lastly, I think there are a lot of affirmative action related efforts to provide resources to both women and other marginalized and excluded groups. There's certainly lessons that we can take from there, whether they're youth funds or they're funds that are dedicated to women in other spheres that are not necessarily labeled gender lens investing. There's certainly lessons that we can pick up from those. And I would really encourage that we all pay attention to those other funds and really figure out what lessons we can take on board from those, and adapt for the purposes of gender lens investing. So just to say thank you for this very engaging conversation. I've learned quite a lot, and I hope that we can continue to collaborate in this effort.
Thank you very much, Dabasaki Makikemajiba of the Ford Foundation. At this juncture, I'd like to also thank all the panelists, or the resource person. I want to thank the IIF chairman, and also all the members of the audience. We still have about 67 with us today. I'd like to let you know that the conversation will still continue, and that we will be sharing with you today's resources and other resources that other panelists have shared. And I'll end on this point that we do not need to reinvent the wheel, but we can share learnings from each other to grow this emerging field. At this point, I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all and have a nice day.